Welcome back to another UNC Basketball podcast here on TarHeelIllustrated.com. And if you are watching us on our super fast growing YouTube channel, that is called Tar Heel Illustrated. And if you haven't been over to our site, TarHeelIllustrated.com, please go over there. Just $8.33 a month, and you can get access to all of our goodies. And most of it is premium content, and almost all of what David Sisk does is premium content. And he is David Sisk, our director of basketball recruiting and analyst. He's a longtime AAU college and high school coach. I am THI publisher Andrew Jones, and we continue to preview individual Tar Heels as we build toward the 2021-22 basketball season, the inaugural season of Hubert Davis. And we've already talked about Armando Bacot and Caleb Love, and now we're going to talk about Kerwin Walton, sophomore shooting guard. Started, I believe the first game he started was Georgia Tech last year, right around Christmas time, right before Christmas, or right after Christmas. Started the rest of the season, averaged 8.2 points a game, 1.8 assists, 1.7 rebounds. His job was to put the ball in the basket, and he did that. 44.4% from the field, 42% from three-point range, 58 of his 79 made field goals last year were threes. He was in double figures 11 times, a high of 19 against Louisville, and he had 18 against Duke. In fact, he scored 30 points in 2 games against Duke, was 8 for 11 from three-point range combined in those 2 games. David, I don't think there's a whole lot of mystery about what kind of player Kerwin Walton is. He's a guy that gets the ball, gets open, catches it, and shoots it. He did show an ability to use the dribble a couple of times to get some separation and go toward the basket a little bit late in the season. We talked to him a couple of weeks ago, and he said that that's been one of his points of emphasis, that and defense in the offseason. And now, before I toss it over to you, I'll say that I did watch him a little bit in the open practice that the media was allowed to watch, and I didn't really see a whole lot different. He just got the same hair, got the same shot, kind of looked the same, except a little bit bigger, a little bit thicker. And I think that will help him defensively, because there were times where he would get screened and just kind of bounce off a little bit last year, didn't really fight through it that much. So I think we'll see maybe a little bit better defensive player when his guy goes through the lane. I think he'll stay with him a little bit better because he looks considerably stronger. So what are your thoughts about Kerwin Walton as we gear toward the start of the season?
Well, Kerwin, let's go to last year. The thing about Kerwin, I think you said, 8.5 points a game?
Yeah, 8.2.
Those were allowed 8.5 points.
Yeah.
I think we look at some guys that average 8.5 points a game, and you'll think, well, they score some, and you really don't think about them being an offensive threat. But, he had so many games last year where he was the difference maker offensively. It just seemed like he got on a roll, and man, and I know when you score 8.5 points, that's going to basically roughly three pointers. But it seemed like, he had some games where he had 4 or 5. He just kept making them, or it might be a situation where he just made them bang, bang, bang in a row.
Yeah,
and they were big shots and big situations. He didn't get a ton of shots, but highly effective. We talked about his percentages, I think 45%, and he was consistent with that. Tremendous three-point shooter. I think he's a really good pull-up jumper, has a good pull-up jumper right there around the elbows or on the foul line. I do like his mid-range game. I wouldn't call him a 3-level scorer. I think he's a 2-level scorer.
Yeah.
So, that gets into last year. Like I said, I think if he would have been in a situation where he would have got a lot of shots, and maybe it's good that he didn't. It kind of breaks the guy in. There's not a lot of pressure.
Yeah.
But, if you're in a situation where you get a ton of threes and you're like Steph Curry or somebody, and you're throwing up 10 or 12 a game, then, 45%, if you're shooting that many, it's you're going to average 20 points a game at least, and you're going to make 5 to 6 three-pointers a game. So, you really had to take it how much it was in bulk. I look at him this year, he can't let the sophomore slump get in his head. You always hear about that. He can't let it do that. And I don't think it's going to be because anything that he would do differently or he can't figure the game out or anything like that. He just doesn't – if he has a game or two where he's not shooting well, he doesn't need to let that sophomore slump get into his head and say, well, I'm struggling because I'm a sophomore. Hopefully that'll never happen because I think he could have a better year this year. I think he's going to have more opportunities because the floor is going to be spread more. You got to think about last year. Now, I know they had an inside-out game where if they got caught with doubles down in the block or anything like that. But there wasn't, when we've talked about this with Caleb Love, there was not a whole lot of room offensively to maneuver and to get open last year. So if they're just good on the perimeter and the floor spread more, like we think it's going to be, they're going to have a stretch four now. You've got Caleb Love who can put the ball on the floor. Hopefully they're going to be a little bit more explosive this year and getting to the rim. They're going to have more lanes. Well, who does that favor? It favors the shooter. How come? Well, if you're Caleb Love and you've got space, what happens? You draw Kerwin Walton's help. Now, if Kerwin Walton's guy doesn't help, then Caleb Love gets a yellow brick road all the way to the rim. But normally there's the help and they can kick and they can find a shooter. Also, they're playing fast tempo, when they're perimeter oriented, and they can get – it's very hard to check a shooter in transition. You have to guard a guy 94 feet. Well, I think he's got opportunities to get more shots this year and more open shots this year. So I see no reason why he shouldn't have another tremendous year, especially from three-point line.
And as a coach, answer this question. So many of his threes last year were swing passes. What's the difference between taking a three when you're able to, if there's penetration and kick out where you can catch and step into it, as opposed to catching it on a swing? He's going to have more of those because they didn't get a lot of kickouts from the post last year.
Yeah.
For those threes.
I think the easiest shot for the three is to kick out from the post. And here's the reason, because a lot of the times when you practice, and there's two reasons, and it's really the same thing. Number one, you get so many shots in practice when you're facing up. Now, they'll swing pass where you're getting it from over here and you got to catch it here and you got to turn. Yeah. But the majority of your shots that you get, whether you're shooting off a gun, whether you've got a rebounder, is that they're kicking it right back to you and you're squared up, which brings me to the second point. You're catching a ball and you're squared up.
Yep.
So you're not catching and trying to turn, and maybe you're not in completely square in rhythm or something like that. So as far as execution and fundamentals go, you have a much better opportunity, when you're getting it from there. So the hardest to me, I think, as a shooter, the hardest is going to be when you're turned away and you're trying to get squared. But the really good shooters can do that. But that's one thing I noticed about Kerwin, though. I think Kerwin, I've noticed when he does turn, his shoulders are in a good spot. And he's just – I saw him in AAU a lot in July, between his junior and his senior year. And he would get so hot. It didn't matter. So
he's got a really quick release.
Yes.
And he's a guy that catches the ball ready to shoot so often. They have two guys like that now, Brady Manick, and we'll talk about him in a later video. But the idea, though, of Kerwin not being the only guy that's taken threes and that can make threes out there, I think will be very interesting to see what kind of looks he gets and how many he gets, because if Manick is hitting out there and if Caleb Love is improved or RJ Davis, whoever else is out there with him, and you've got the element of a couple of guys out there that can shoot and also drive, I think it's going to be open up all kinds of stuff. I just think that he's going to have an opportunity to have a much higher percentage of lesser contested shots this year than he had last year if the vision of what Hubert wants to do becomes a reality.
I think three-point shooters are more effective when they're around other three-point shooters.
Yeah.
And, I mean, that just goes to say, because, number one, you're going to be in space more. And I keep talking about space, but space is huge. And that's why the game has went the way that it's gone now, where everybody's playing behind the three-point line. It's space. Like I said, I always try to pick Nate Oates' brain when I was out on the road at these AAU events and talking to him about why there's more. If you have 4 perimeters and 1 post, there's actually more space than there is with 5 perimeters. And you would think, well, 5 out, there would be more. And we talked about how he likes to set the go screen instead of the ball screen, and everything's space related. So The reason I said that, that'll bring us back to Kerwin Walton, getting to play more in space, having other shooters, stretches the defense more. And what happens is now when you get these kicks, they have to sprint and respect the shooter. So they sprint at the shooter. You shot fake, guy raises up, and now it's much easier to get by him and get into the lane. You draw the next guy, then you kick. And we saw Villanova, they've done this for years. When they were playing North Carolina, how hard they were to guard because all it was a drive and kick. The dribble drive was set up on that. You drive from the wing, you get 2 feet in the lane. The objective is every dribble has to get 2 feet into the lane before you pass. You can't pass till you get there. So you draw help, you kick opposite. You're sprinting out to him, you shot fake, you do the same thing. And the defense just can't keep catching up. So, that's why that's important. And I think, like I said, I think it's more friendly for everybody. We've talked about Baycott. He's got more room to maneuver inside. We've talked about Caleb Love. It's more of a comfort zone for him. Kerwin Walton should have more space to shoot in.
Well, let me ask you, as a coach, what would be your expectation of a guy like Kerwin with his skill set, with his athletic abilities, wherever that range is for him, to adding more to his game? If you're looking at a guy who was primarily a catch and shoot player last year, what's the first thing you would like to see that he has added to his offensive arsenal this year?
Well, I would say this in talking to him, hey, do you want to make money playing basketball? And if you
know the answer to that question.
Yeah, would you rather do that or do you want to dig a ditch for the rest of your life? What would you rather do? So if you want to do that, when you start talking about money and you start talking about the pocket, I think it's easy to get people motivated. I don't think the bench is the greatest motivator. I think the pocketbook's the greatest motivator. So when you start talking about that, you say, okay, what are they looking for in the next level? And you hear so much about 3-and-D guys, and you've already brought up the defensive. So let's go there first. Show that you can be not only a good defender, but I want you to take the challenge to where you're going to be a lockdown defender. That you can say, hey, whoever the best perimeter player is on the other team when we play them, that's who I want them. And I think when you do that, that gives you those guys who are in the league for years, who are not necessarily stars, but there's always a spot for them because they can make the three and they can defend. And we know they can make the three. Now, as he does that, doing it more off the dribble, extending his range. I don't think he's a guy that necessarily has to get to the rim, but in your mid-range games, you have more ways instead of just being a straight line pull-up shooter and going over somebody. There's different ways. Can you go behind the back? Can you go between the legs and do it? Can you go one way and do the other? Can you speed your dribble up with a crossover? Can you be more stop and go? Can you change speeds better? That's a lot of stuff. And then can you shoot off all those moves? And I would think the other thing too, they're looking for guys in the NBA that are going to be about 38 to 40% three-point shooters and 80% foul shooters. And I know he's not going to get to the line a ton because he's not a penetrator, and this may not seem like much, but hey, when you get to the foul line, can you knock down 90% of your foul shots? Because they're going to look at stuff like that. But and I've talked to scouts. We've had Derek Murray on here before, and we talked about guys' potential, and they'll look at a guy and say, I think this guy can be, and pro scouts are going to look at him and they'll say, player X can be a 38 to 40% three-point shooter because he's shooting 87% from a foul line, even though he's only shooting 31% from three. And I'm just throwing a scenario out there. Yeah. They look at that foul shooting to gauge how the ceiling that they think a player can reach. So, I obviously he wants to work on everything, but those are just some things that I'd point out.
You're talking about making a defender move. And if you make a defender move, you increase what? You increase the likelihood the defender's going to make a mistake. You can draw fouls on the perimeter. It's like Leroy loves to get guys in foul trouble. A guy like Kerwin should be an outstanding free throw shooter. You can add to your statistical average, your points per game average just by getting in the line. You help the team by getting in the line. A lot of teams might put their best perimeter defender on him because they don't want him killed. They figure, okay, let's just see if Manek is hot and cold. So we'll see what he's up to this game. Caleb Love is still kind of in the low 30s, but we can't let Walton beat us from out there. And he's getting more looks like they said, we're going to put our best defender on. Well, if he could pound it on the ground a couple of times with left hand or right hand and move in a particular direction and draw a reach, draw a block, and that kind of thing, that could help. That could change a game.
Yep, I agree. And like I said, I think he might have been a surprise to some people. Having watched him as much as I did in high school and AAU, it was not a surprise to me. That's what he could do. And to quote Denny Green, he was what we thought he was.
Yeah.
And I don't think that changes. So here's a beauty about him. He doesn't have to reinvent the wheel. He doesn't have to try to go outside of himself and do something that he can't do. And I'd say this too. Hey, the pressure is not on you. You've got time to pray. You don't have to. We're talking about making some additions. You don't have to do this overnight.
Yeah.
Just do what you do best and work on these other things, and there's no pressure. It seems like with all these players, we talk about space and all these things. I just think there ought to be a greater comfort zone. I mean, I'm sorry that players should be more comfortable.
100%. I love your point about not trying to reinvent his game. That's one of the things that I totally grasp about him. I think he's okay improving incrementally. I think he's one of these guys that recognizes, look, I'm not going to be at that point that I'm eyeballing tomorrow. It's going to take a while to get there, and I'm comfortable, throwing myself into the process and kind of massaging my game and making it happen over the course of time. And it'll be interesting to see what he's added this year, and it will be interesting to see what his ultimate role is, because his team's got so many parts. They're all going to be flailing around for a while. So it'll be really interesting to see where he fits in, what his role is, how much he's playing, and all that kind of stuff when we roll in to March. He is David Sisk. I am Andrew Jones. We appreciate you stopping by.